this. You are in a really stinky room. You have essentially no understanding of why it's so stinky, not the precise causation, nor the scientific explanation. All you know is shit fucking stinks. Is your observation any less valid or indicative of the problems in this room due to your lack of thorough understanding? Do you seek a way out of the room? Do you seek help from others? Do you lie there resigned to your fate, or do you start tearing shit up maybe? Thrash metal had an interesting evolution, morphing into existence over the course of the early 80s as an evolution of the melodic and epic new wave of British heavy metal and the intense and frantic hardcore punk. The term thrash metal, much like most musical categorization, became accepted in the scene years after the first nominal thrash bands came into existence. Thrash metal bands at the time termed themselves and were deemed titles such as power metal, speed metal, death metal, hardcore metal, and heavy metal. Despite today, those different categorizations have drastically different meanings. Thrash itself, or thrashing around, was kind of like an adjective. Metal was a rapidly evolving, exciting, and burgeoning new music style that took years and decades to truly solidify into strict categorizations. This mostly due to the faithful work of neo-scribes and historians, performing their duties towards a scene that demanded a nigh-religious commitment. Thrash metal began as, like I said, a melding of heavy metal with hardcore punk, creating a brand new musical style capable of displaying raw intensity and frantic pacing, as well as epic melodies and powerful rhythms. As far as the sonic sounds go, this sounds interesting enough. Slightly less discussed is the thematics and ideas being presented by this new melding of styles. Hardcore punk, of course, was famously tapped into societal and political issues, typically of an anti-capitalist bent, and cultivated a sense of community against an establishment hell-bent on eradicating miscreants such as themselves. Heavy metal, while being rooted in outcast culture and carrying some societal critique baggage, primarily had its greatest effect in the essence of escape, a glorification of the profound, a channeling of alienation and the weakness of the individual into something powerful, albeit still wallowing in lonesome individuality. What this created is a fascinating exploration of influence and especially history. The heyday of thrash metal was the mid-80s to early 90s, an era marred by the constant threat of nuclear annihilation and perpetual battles of good versus evil. Thank God that's over. The generations leading up to this moment endured the Vietnam War and a massive youth uprising against it, which entailed physical and cultural crackdowns we still feel the effects of today. Your lack of allegiance to the military-industrial complex and the wars waged against dastardly communism is met with accusations of terrorism, misanthropy, hooliganism, or just as flat-out wastes of oxygen. This disastrous war, hot and cold, and the succession of economic blunders that followed led to a massive gutting of public services that kept the free world from wanting to collectively put a bullet in their heads, having a stable income, affordable housing, and plenty of public areas, nice shit like that. And subsequently a horrendous uptick in wealth inequality, drug abuse, poverty, suicide, and environmental devastation that made a generation of young people understandably confused and frustrated. The 80s brought forth an emphasis on the individual and a consumerist wonderland to solve the individual's problems. It brought forth a moralistic imposition from above to worship so-called American values, for if we didn't, the evil hordes from the East would ravage our very way of life. Also, it brought forth a new wave of the satanic panic, eventually climaxed when a satisfying scapegoat was identified: heavy metal. Watch my one video for an in-depth rundown on the political forces at play in the satanic panic and its broader implications in the Cold War. Let's take all this exposition and go back a couple years. 1986. Your dad resented you because he went to war like a badass, and all you've done is spin your hippy-dippy ass records and grow your hair out. Your mother is disgusted by the vile and satanic Black Sabbath and Judas Priest records you enjoy, of which have developed an unsavory reputation in her social circles. The most popular kids at school, or later, the majority of your coworkers, were obviously stuck in some kind of rat race that was the antithesis of what you found cool or were drawn to. Get a job, or work hard, are daily mantras thrust into your ears and posed as the keys to a happy life, even though your hard-working father can't survive a single night without drowning the day with drink, and your mother was forced to get a shitty job just to keep up with the mortgage. Fire and brimstone were constantly flooding out of every media outlet, and the planet itself was teetering on the edge of imminent destruction. It's understandable for you to feel so weak, so overwhelmed, so alone. And then you hear some shit like this.
What is this garbage you're watching? I want to watch the news.
Are you making headway at least?
This is the news.
Who's this vinegar-voiced, tight-jean having son of a bitch, and why did he make you involuntarily grit your teeth and bang your head? Perhaps you relate to this everyman, relay his frustration with the humdrum and hypocrisy of modern society, how we're forced to live in such miserable conditions, all because some fat cat corporate jagoffs don't want to buy peace? There's no solution here, and you don't really care. In the moment, singing along to the catchy refrain, "If there's a new way, I'll be the first in line, but it better work this time," is therapeutic and powerful. The last part of the song, a crescendo of passion and frustration, is almost enchanting. Your misery, loneliness, and weakness has been transformed into raw, epic power. The stench of the room is finally being acknowledged and rightfully berated. But that's all that's happening. Beratement. Dave Mustaine had, by all accounts, a fucking dreadful upbringing.
Dave Mustaine, conscious of it or not, was outraged by the life given to him by a capitalist free nation of prosperity and liberty. His family and upbringing being the equivalent of Taken if Liam Neeson was the bad guy and did the taking. His mother eventually became a Jehovah's Witness, and voila, you got yourself a homeless, emancipated minor junkie.
The last thing he needed was the world to be blown up by nuclear warheads. Or maybe he felt exuberance at how there's some shit in this world that's more fucked up than his own life. This song can be seen as a desperate plea for mercy, or perhaps a plea to finally be put out of his misery, or most likely, just something that tickles that part of your brain that appreciates the profound and surreal, a vegetative embrace of everything wrong with humanity, a melancholic celebration of death, and salute to the stench, both seen as facts of life. 1987. The stench is getting worse. Literally. There's been lots of talk about ozone depletion and global warming and pollution, blah blah blah. But, I mean, is any of that shit even real? Your buddy John says it's just some bullshit to make money for big gover business. There's no way a little hairspray or your shitty moped is doing much harm. In the 1970s, chemists Frank Sherwood Rowland and Mario Molina linked the depletion of the ozone layer to man-made chemicals. And without getting too bogged down in scientific terminology here, it entailed severe environmental consequences. Chemical industry leaders fought tooth and nail to prevent this from gaining any credibility, deeming their profits more important than inedible food and rampant skin cancer. Action was taken 14 years later in 1987 with the Montreal Protocol, and only because it included the Multilateral Fund, a financial mechanism that, according to a former senior Democratic staffer for international environmental policy on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a mouthful. The Multilateral Fund is critical to creating markets in developing countries for U.S. products. U.S. contributions to the treaty's Multilateral Fund help other countries meet their obligations under the Montreal Protocol, and when a country like India looks for air conditioners that are made without harmful chemicals, they often buy American-made products. You may think this as an act of benevolence, a whipping of the poor nations into shape by the mindful world police, with the added benefit of economic gain. Why, then, was the policy of Ronald Reagan and George Bush to severely deregulate the Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Energy, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in the years before and after 1987? In fact, this hypocrisy was nothing new. The 1950s saw private and publicly funded scientific research conclude that fossil fuel burning had a significant impact on the environment, followed by industry leaders concealing this information for decades to save profit margins. These same industry leaders spent billions on think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, the Hoover Institution, the American Enterprise Institute, Chamber of Commerce of the United States, the Business Roundtable, the National Organization of Manufacturers, all to lobby for government policy to back their economic interests. Reagan was their legendary champion. Bush was, frankly, a nightmare for environmental science in the EPA. Under Bush, industry actors gained the right to challenge scientific analysis, slowing the regulatory process. Bush's EPA gummed up the works of climate science by playing up scientific uncertainty around climate change and prohibiting agency employees from even mentioning the phenomenon. Business bought out the government, gutted public service, devastated the people and the planet, and then blamed the aftermath on what was in reality their own hollow puppet. The stink was blamed on those who smelt it. How could this be? How could the fate of humanity and the planet Earth itself be gambled on something as ridiculous as profit-making for some fat cat corporate jagoffs? Even then, the Montreal Protocol, in retrospect, is viewed as a remarkable achievement of international cooperation, only taking 14 years to implement. Only 14. How much better do you think our prospects for combating climate change are today? Despite all the evidence in the world, we still have industry leaders and our profit-seeking ruling class dragging their feet and tricking us into thinking there's anything other than their own self-interest keeping us from doing the right thing. It's as if a man came into your room eating copious amounts of beans, farting and shitting all over the place. And when you tell them to stop eating the beans, he gaslights you into thinking there's nothing he can do so hastily, and that maybe you should light a little candle or something. Yeah, all this bullshit is making the air a bit stinky, but at least it's not like direct, outright murder. Like those in power are mucking up the earth a bit, but whatever, right? It's not like these fat cat corporate jagoffs are funding death squads, right? From 1975 to 1983, probably for a lot longer, the US funded and organized a campaign of political repression by right-wing dictatorships involving intelligence operations, coups, and assassinations of left-wing sympathizers in Central and South America. It was called Operation Condor. Look this shit up. It got revealed over the course of the years, and the CIA doesn't even hide it at this point. In fact, today's right-wingers consider it pretty based that far-right death squads threw suspected leftists out of helicopters. Democratically elected president of Chile, Salvador Allende, was implementing policies that aimed to help the regular citizens. But due to the implications this would have on the ruling class of Chile and the interests of the United States, this could not be tolerated. Allende was couped and essentially forced to kill himself. Suspected leftists and sympathizers were brutally repressed. Far-right death squads roamed the streets, imposing the will of the ruling few. And this was just in Chile. Similar events occurred in Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Peru. Additionally, for decades, similar events occurred in Central America. Perhaps you've heard of the Iran-Contra scandal, where the US, under Reagan, illegally sold Iran weapons of which the profits were used to fund anti-leftist paramilitary groups in Central America to terrorize the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Despite this whole saga obviously getting the US rightly reprimanded, it sort of conveniently served as a distraction, a one-off scandal by some crooked individuals, and watch as this whole thing just fades into history. But come on, you're smarter than that. The lowest death estimates are around 60,000, but considering so many of the victims were either disappeared or thrown into mass graves or fed to dogs, it's most likely in the hundreds of thousands. Why'd the US do this? It was alarming that in just a few months after the Sandinista revolution, Nicaragua received international acclaim for its rapid progress in the fields of literacy and health. It was alarming that a socialist mixed economy state could do in a few short months what the Somoza dynasty, a US client state, could not do in 45 years. It was truly alarming that the Sandinistas were intent on providing the very services that establish a government's political and moral legitimacy. The US is run by a ruling elite that will sacrifice hundreds of thousands of innocents, even jeopardize the well-being of the earth itself to maintain their positions of power. Communists, socialists, leftists, people who want a more just world and the like, are dangerous to this hierarchy of power, and your tax dollars will be spent on their repression instead of on new roads, high-speed rail, free healthcare, education, housing, or whatever other ridiculous pipe dreams you have. Your taxes are better spent on a new Hawk missile or Apache helicopter for right-wing death squads in Nicaragua.
you at their head, rhythm of a communist threat. Rather democracy is now in control, loading up people like dead. Day by force, controlled by fear, death squad police of the right. A step out subversion, dissension unrest, those who are close will be dead.
Capitalism also can never stay home. It goes abroad. If you ever saw the film Controlling Interest, there's a corporate president who says, those corporations that stayed regional in New England years ago and decided not to go national, we can't even remember their names. They died. We had to go national. And those of us who are now national know we have to go international. We have to invest abroad. So one of the laws of capitalist motion and development is this inexorable expansion. And that means expansion into an expropriation of the third world. A process that's been going on for about 400 years. Perpetrated by the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Dutch, the Belgians, the French, the English, and most recently, most successfully, most impressively, by the Americans. That is by the ruling classes of these countries, not by the ordinary people. The ordinary people simply paid the costs of empire. The ordinary people simply sent their sons off to die on the plains of India or in the jungles of the Congo or in Latin America, wherever else. But that expropriation of the third world has been going on for 400 years, brings us to another revelation, namely that the third world is not poor. You don't go to poor countries to make money. There are very few poor countries in this world. Most countries are rich. The Philippines are rich. Brazil is rich. Mexico is rich. Chile is rich. Only the people are poor. But there's billions to be made there, to be carved out and to be taken. There's been billions for 400 years. The capitalist European and North American powers have carved out and taken the timber, the flax, the hemp, the cocoa, the rum, the tin, the copper, the iron, the rubber, the bauxite, the slaves, and the cheap labor. They have taken out of these countries. These countries are not underdeveloped, they're overexploited.
All this information is a real drag, right? Well, luckily for you, you live in the free world. Sure, problems exist, but it's never been better to be alive than right now. Look at all you have access to. Just consume. Consume. And forget about all this nonsense. Have a burger. Watch some TV. Buy some piece of plastic and shut up. God bless America and God... Sure, you might think. I would fucking love to, but... I mean, how much longer does the Earth even have before it's too late to save it? I have to work at a shit job to afford all the treats you're talking about. Let alone pay my rent and whatnot, but... Our taxes are really getting spent on murdering kids and shit? It's kind of bullshit. And you're right for thinking that. It's worthy of outrage. Even here in the free world, there are some things you can't say or advocate for. When you have a room full of treats, and, well, when you live in the most moral and righteous place on earth, you really don't need to do all this rationalizing and self-determining. There is no reason to insist on self-determination if the administered life is the comfortable and even the good life. Perceived comfort begets ignorance. Ignorance of the suffering of others. Ignorance of your own suffering. Ignorance of the suffering of others begets death and destruction. Ignorance of your own suffering begets the death and destruction of your soul. Is the pinnacle of humanity just isolated pockets of individual numbness? The greatest lie being told to you is that you, the mighty individual, have any control in this system. Your desires aren't even your own. They serve a purpose, the purpose of extraction. You serve a role, the role of a pawn. Your life is cheap as whatever it takes to keep you numb. This is the good life. It's free. It's the pinnacle. But not for you. couple bands you've listened to here are from Germany, specifically during this time period, West Germany, the part of post-war Germany that the US and the liberal capitalist West exerted their influence over, as opposed to East Germany, or the part that the USSR exerted their influence over. It might come as a surprise that people living in the splendorous and free part of Germany had such charged complaints of their superior society. Living in the West has thrust upon us the propaganda of our superior way of life, as opposed to the others. We live in abundance, they don't. We have freedom, they do not. We have heavy metal, they couldn't possibly have it. The accusations of depravity and lack our rulers hurl at our supposed ideological enemies primarily serve as confessions. West Germany required billions in aid from the US and East Germany itself, as well as pawning off Nazi intelligence and leadership. West Germany had a pervasive domestic police force that arrested and harassed far more of its citizens than even the wildest pipe dreams of the Stasi. West Germany did have an abundance of metal acts, but not as a celebration of their supremacy over fellow countrymen. Focus was placed on the absurd. Bands played a chaotic and frantic brand of metal teetering on the edge of collapse and insanity. Some lambasted their own government and the current society they're in. Some gave reminders of the horrors witnessed just decades earlier. Some expressed how they were nothing but pawns in a grand ideological game, of which the goal was for their rulers to remain rulers. East German metal acts may have had quite similar sentiments. However, these musicians did not have the tumor of making it big attached to them that comes with the profit motive in music industry. Their sentiments remained their own, uncommodified. The shared experience of a fascist regime left a lasting scar for many. For some, however, that scar never healed. It only festered. Despite the efforts of apologists and distractors, Nazi Germany was always entangled with capital. Massive corporations, including American ones, cozied right up to the Reich before, during, and after World War II. The recent communist waves threatening to wash over Europe necessitated a savior, a champion, even if that meant unleashing a monster of their own making. These monsters were Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler, co-opting pseudo-socialistic terminology and posturing to channel the socialist wave into a national socialist one. An abandonment of class distinction in service of the nation. Rich and poor alike will unite to bring back times of elden glory. The strong will forge ahead a path of eternal prosperity. But first, we must be rid of the poisonous influence of the weak, communists, Jews, gays, blacks, etc. As it worked back then, so it works today. The people's needs are channeled away from what they need in service of the rulers, the ones directing the flow of cattle. Our irreconcilable class interests are swept under the rug, and we're told we must rid ourselves of the thing holding us back, whoever or whatever that may be. And because the true thing is hidden under the rug, we've nothing left but to cannibalize our brethren till nothing but the rulers remain. Their first step? Beat the sword to the left. Blame those seeking a fair and just system for all of society's ills. Rid the situation of those screaming to look under the rug. Pretty heavy stuff, right? Just like extreme metal, you could say. Therein lies its value and purpose, an expression of some pretty heavy stuff, a macabre fascination with all the fucked up happenings in reality and our imaginations. Speaking about the album Deception Ignored by Death Row, a blog post from 2012 explains the draw and value of thrash metal during the late 80s to many young men living in the Imperial Core in particular. For someone to have a car and a TV and to be enraptured by money, they are being seduced by the siren song of capitalism. They're moving upwards and outwards from their sense of self. It doesn't matter that they work in a factory or not. They don't have class identity as workers. And that's what captures my interest. The concern expressed above is one I feel completely, and I feel alone for it. I do not feel like joining the Communist Party. I do not feel like telling other people they should change their lives. I do not expect a revolution. I want the despair expressed. This is enough for me. That struggle, the intelligent but disconnected youth, is what drives thrash, and also what makes this particular offering convincing. The words themselves betray a lack of political knowledge, and the pose is exposed easily if this is compared to, say, a real socio-political hardcore punk records lyric. No Marx has been read, but what is true in the core of this is what is alluring. Intelligence and loneliness breed paranoia. When the most important thing you have to tell to the outside world is, I don't trust you. When the strength you have is yours, essentially because it is not shared with others. I believe this is weakness turned to strength. It's an important part of heavy metal. Thrash metal bands in the 80s were in a world of ideological war and certain demise lurking right around the corner. In the West, nothing but imposed apathy from above, an order from daddy to stay in your bedroom and play with your toys. But the stench is creeping in under your door. You can hear the screams of those falling victim to the stench outside. Sometimes you can even peer through the keyhole and witness the horror firsthand. But you can't leave your bedroom. You can't break down the door by yourself. And besides, look at the treats you have. All you can do is scream, make a racket, tear some shit up. Exhausted, in a stupor, the fixation on horrors is medicine. You're addicted to death. Its certainty, its gravity, its prevalence. Daddy is okay with that. He keeps you occupied. He wants you to combat the stench by choosing to simply not breathe. This is what separates thrash metal from its hardcore punk ancestor, a refusal to collaborate with others to break down the door, in order to preserve a sense of righteous tragedy and suffering loneliness. Now, let's come back to today. You are working more, getting paid less, and everything is more expensive. The Earth is still teetering on the brink of destruction. The nuclear threat still looms, but is normalized. Massive corporations and techno-feudal overlords exploit the land, and you, the techno-peasants, to fuel AI engines that crank out the most brain-numbingly noxious slop to ever exist. Just as the Nazi Party intimidated large corporations to capitulate and toe the fascist line, today we see companies like Intel willingly give 10% of their company to the Trump administration. Not as a pseudo-communistic nationalization process in service of the working class, but due to pure intimidation and force. Might makes right. Fascists know that an effective strategy to subdue the capitalist status quo is by bludgeon. German industry leaders prioritized their interests over the people, and willingly cozied up to the Nazi buzzsaw to avoid its ire. Modern industry, specifically in tech, see the only way to save their skins is by chumming up to the man wielding the club.
Thanks for hosting us, and this is quite a group to get together. And I think all of the companies here are just making huge investments in the country.
Thank you for incredible leadership, including getting this group together.
I want to thank you for including me this evening. It's incredible to be among everyone here, particularly you and the First Lady.
Thank you for being such a pro-business, pro-innovation president. It's a very refreshing change. We're very excited to see what you're doing to make all of our companies and our entire country so successful.
The nerds with all the money and tech are buddy-buddy with the bullies, armed and angry. Who gets the bludgeon first? Of course it's the left. First they came and so on. The left is ridiculed and vilified and bullied to the point of fractured, scattered insignificance. The better to unleash an uncontested assault when those fighting for the well-being of the techno-peasants are eradicated. The ruling status quo? They're perfectly fine as long as their money isn't jeopardized, and they have a cozy spot to lounge on the right. Once the pesky left is neutralized, people get taken off the streets by neo-Gestapo squads for speaking against irrefutable horrors. The color of one's skin or accent is reason enough for deportation and harassment by state-sanctioned goons. Happiness is found in fewer and fewer things. Clarity of mind is ever distant. The same old elixir is still being peddled. Consume. Unluckily for you, all we have to consume now is the aforementioned horrifying slop. Commonly established facts, shit we've known for decades and even centuries, is being dragged down into muddy water. What's true? What's lie? Who fucking knows? Eat your slop. The warning alarm has been rung. It's been ringing. We all know it fucking stinks. Are you gonna fight or capitulate? Are you just gonna scream into your pillow?